Alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to our program Reflections on the Glorious Quran, a program in which we try to explore the meanings of this glorious book, in which we try to understand the message of this book that is life transforming and changing our lives for better. And in today's program, I want to talk about a very famous surah of the Quran, a surah that some of you might be reciting almost every week on Fridays, Surah Al-Kahf. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam recommended that we read this surah every Friday, and particularly at the time of the Dajjal, and in that will be our salvation, and we will be rescued from the trappings of the Dajjal, the Prophet said. So let me just begin by selecting few of the stories in this wonderful surah. The surah has 5 main stories. The story of the young men who escaped from the anger and the wrath of their Roman emperor, and then hid themselves away for many years. In fact, the Quran tells us for 3 centuries. And so there's a story about these wonderful young men who saved themselves. The second important story in this surah is the story about the 2 men, the poor man and the very rich, wealthy entrepreneur. And third story is the story of Adam alayhi salam and the shaitan. The fourth one is Musa and Hizr alayhi salam, and the final story is that of Dhul Qarnayn. I will inshallah ul Aziz explain as much as I can these surahs, but also try to link them together and try to understand what is the common thread that unites and that weaves through the 5 stories. And so what is the central theme of this wonderful surah Al-Kahf? So let's begin by looking at the second of these 5 stories, the story about the rich man and the poor man. The Quran begins, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وضرب لهم مثل الرجلين جعلنا لأحدهما جنتين من أعناب وحففناهما بنخل وجعلنا بينهما زرعا كلتا الجنتين آتت أكلها ولم تظلم منه شيئا وفجرنا خلالهما نهرا وكان له ثمر فقال لصاحبه وهو يحاوره أنا أكثر منك مالا وأعز نفرا ودخل جنته وهو ظالم لنفسه قال ما أظن أن تبيد هذه أبدا صدق الله مولانا العظيم وبلغنا رسوله النبي الكريم. In this passage, I'll give you the translation, the parable of the rich man. Tell them the parable of the 2 men. To one of them we gave 2 orchards of grape hedged by palm trees and a cornfield in the middle. Both orchards gave abundant fruit throughout the year, and we made a running stream between them. So he had a lot of agricultural produce. One day he said to his friend, as they were arguing among themselves, I have more wealth and a larger family than you. He entered his garden having wronged himself. He said, I do not think that these orchards will ever perish, nor do I think that judgment day will come. And even if I was returned to my Lord, I will certainly go to something better than this. And then the poor man warns him. His friend said to him whilst he was arguing, how can you deny the one who created you from dust, then from a drop of sperm? But for me, He is Allah, my Lord. I do not associate anyone with my Lord. When you entered your orchard, why didn't you say, there is no power except that of Allah, even if you saw that I was less than you in wealth and number of children? I hope my Lord will give me better than your two orchards. He could send a thunderbolt from the sky on your orchard and turn them into barren land, or its water level could sink deep in earth so that you would not be able to reach it. So the Quran is really telling us the story of these two men, the rich agriculturalist who's got these two wonderful orchards, and then not just orchard, vineyard and a cornfield, and in both of the orchards, and then between them runs a stream. So really, you couldn't expect anything better. And can you just imagine, in the barren, dry, arid deserts of Arabia, to have something like this, of course, would give you enormous wealth and standing and power and fame, really. So this was someone who was really very wealthy. You know, this is how the Quran describes very vividly his possessions, his agricultural land, and his palm groves and vineyard. Then, you know, but he has a friend, someone who is familiar with, somebody who he perhaps grew up together, his neighbor, but he's a poor man, all right? Yeah, he doesn't have much means. And, you know, they were arguing, the Quran tells us, and it's interesting, they were arguing. What would they have been arguing? Well, the answer lies in what the man says. How can you deny the one who created you from dust and then from drop of sperm? So they were arguing about theology, effectively, religion. They were arguing, you know, does God exist? And what will be the fate of those, you know, who do wrong? And but this arrogant and the rich man, what does he do? He says to him, look, you know, you talk too much. He says to this poor friend, you just talk too much. You know, the reality is that I am far more wealthier than you. I have far bigger, you know, larger orchard. I have a far larger number of children and family. I'm better than you in every sense. So your idea of God, your idea of religion is really of no consequence. I am, you know, powerful. And so there is no, and then, you know, the man of God, this poor man, says to him, listen, remember, you know, there is no power except that of Allah. Even if you saw that I was less than you in wealth and number of children, you know, I have greater hopes of my Lord. You know, I really don't buy into this whole idea that because you've got more wealth, you've got bigger orchards, somehow you are special. You know, there's nothing of the kind, you know. And, you know, he warns him. He says, you know, anything could happen to your material wealth. Anything can happen to it. You know, the water level could sink deep and deep, and, you know, you could lose the stream, all right? Or, you know, a thunderbolt from the skies could actually leave your land barren. Okay? All these are possibilities, you know. This world is not without, you know, its difficulties and changing times. So what happens? So the next part is where the orchards are destroyed. Verse 42 says, so his fruits were destroyed. There he was, wringing his hands, regretting what he had spent on it. The trellises had fallen down, and he sobbed, I wish I had never associated anyone with my Lord. There was no army that could help him against Allah, nor was he able to defend himself. This clearly shows that the real power belongs to Allah, the absolute truth. To believe in Him gives the best reward and the best outcome. Now, so what happens? Well, let's just sort of recount the story very briefly. So there is this wealthy man who has these 2 orchards, which are ideal in terms of producing grape, in terms of producing cereals, and in terms of giving a very big produce of dates as well. So he's got these wonderful 2 orchards, and there is a stream running between them, so they're well watered. I mean, it's an ideal situation really for this rich man. He's arguing with his poor fellow neighbor, and this really is interesting. The Quran is in a way, this is addressed to the Makkans, so in a way it's again saying, well, yes, you are wealthy. You have these orchards in Taif, all right. Abu Sufyan had them, Walid ibn Mughira had them, Abu Lahab had them. So they had these orchards, okay. But Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is teaching you something else. He was teaching them, just like this man was teaching his fellow friend, how they need to be careful and to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and so on. And his response is very interesting. First, he says, look, I am far wealthier, richer than you. I have a big family, okay. Who are you? What are you to me? Of course, this is arrogance. Really, it's a very sad state of affairs when a rich man, shows off and boasts about his wealth, that I have all this wealth, I have all these material things, and who are you? You've got nothing. You're empty-handed. You're a poor man. How can you talk to me like that? This is the arrogance of the rich man. And then, the poor man, of course, is perhaps, as I said, grew up together, a neighbor, and possibly someone who was well acquainted with him, kept on reminding him of his duty towards Allah and to be worshipful and to be just and fair all the time. And this in itself is a very interesting, because what it is reminding us of is, good friends should always be reminding, giving a nasiha to their friends, okay? Whether they are rich or poor, whether they are older or younger, whoever it is, we should always be there to give the right, message to others who are in need of it. And, he really felt that this man needed guidance, and he's providing him that. Anyway, his response is very negative, okay? He says, well, look, first of all, I don't think there is a God, and even if there was one, I think I'm going to be better off, okay? Again, a very arrogant kind of response. And this man warns him, don't take things for granted, Yes, you have wealth today, but it could perish any time. A thunderbolt can strike it. So what happens? Well, lo and behold, soon afterwards, what happens is a thunderbolt. This is a lightning and hailstones and thunder that really destroys his palm grove. All the trees fall down. The trellises on which the grapevines were spread out fell down, and the corns were all burnt to ashes. So this was a catastrophic event. Okay, something very nasty happened to his garden and orchards the next day or whenever. Allah knows when. The Quran doesn't actually give us those details. And the point here is that the Quran doesn't give details of exact times and exact places and of exact names. It's very interesting. The Quran only mentions stories of few people by name, and it only names few people. Amongst the Sahaba, we only have the name of Zayd, mentioned in the glorious Quran. Rasulullah's name is only mentioned 4 times, in the whole of the Quran. So, the Quran is not really keen on telling us some details which, some people would love to have, but the Quran doesn't regard them as important. It wants us to focus on the core of the message. And the message is a very simple, straightforward message that, don't boast, don't brag, and, don't be arrogant simply, okay? Because the consequences of being so are really harsh, they are destructive, they are damaging, really. So, and this is the theme, that runs through the whole of Surah Al-Qaf, and we'll talk more about that later on. So, but coming back to this, when his orchards are destroyed, he now regrets. He wrings his hands with embarrassment, with regret, with a sense of guilt that he's upset his God. He's upset Allah by saying what he said to the poor man, and here is the consequence of what he has done. So, the warning is very clear that sometimes we can boast and brag and get away with it. On others, it becomes very difficult. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is angry and punishes, and the scourge does really fall on those people who come and who have been challenging, abusive, insulting, and denial of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is one instance where we see the punishment coming quite soon, rather than later. However, those who commit evil in this life, a lot of the time they get away in terms of Allah does not punishing them here, but there is certainly a far greater punishment in the hereafter. So, what is it that is important in this surah, and how does it relate with previous stories and the stories that follow? Well, when we look at the central theme of Surah Al-Qaf, we notice that it's really on the one hand you had the Roman emperor, and you had these young faithful men who are striving to preserve and save their faith. The emperor wants to convert them back to his idolatrous way, his mythical and his mythical gods. He wants to draw them to that. But they refuse to do that, and in order to escape him, they run away, and they run to the mountain where they take a refuge in a cave. And the Quran says, they were young men, fityatun amanu bi rabbihim wa zidnahum huda. They were young men, and this is really very interesting that it's the young men are usually who are the targets of the Prophet's message. We see that in terms of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We see it with respect to the Bani Israel, the Israelites. Again, Musa concentrated on young people. He focused on the young people and was able to convert them to and to make them follow him. So we see that these were young men, who believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and escaped. And on the other hand, you had the emperor, the power of the emperor, the whole Roman Empire, the wealth of the emperor was making him arrogant. And so I hope you can see the parallelism between the story of the young men of cave and the pauper and the wealthy man in this story. Okay, so there is that similarity. This is a man who is materialistic. That is a spiritual man. Here you have a rich, wealthy, powerful emperor. Here you have a group of young, faithful ones, poor people. Okay, so you see that similarity, a clash between the worldly power, worldly wealth, and poverty, and godliness and spirituality. So there is a clash between materialism and between spirituality, and that is the point, I think, why Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says that when the Dajjal comes, recite the Surah Al-Qaf. And the point about the Dajjal is that the Dajjal is about world, it's about worldliness, it's about trapping us in the world through Dajjal, through fraud, through deception. And if we look around us, we see so much of deception all around us. And this surah is a beautiful and a powerful illustration of this clash between righteousness and wickedness, between spirituality and between materialism, between powerful men and between the weak believing men. And in all of them, inshallah, as we will see in the next story of Musa and Hizr, the winning party is those of Allah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us to understand the beauty of this surah Al-Qaf. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdulillahi rabbil alameen.
Allahu Ghafoor, Allahu Rahim, Allahu yuhibbul